When it comes to metal, heavy metal, and its constantly expanding alternate variations and genres, there is one genre that at its very conception evolved from these foundations and formed far heavier and more sinister sounds and darker subject matters within its music. With a complex and convoluted history, black metal would go on to shock the world with what at the time was considered very pagan, unorthodox, satanic, and overall blasphemous themes. Black metal, a genre filled with insane practices such as the notorious church burnings of Norway and the use of animal carcasses and their severed heads during performances, would only continue to be perpetuated in shocking manners and by gruesome stories that came from some of the bands during the early waves of black metal. And this would stem in an attempt to form an even further unique identity, rejecting what was considered normalcy within not just society, but also the already controversial genre of heavy metal from the 1970s. Bands such as Venom would go on to set expectations in what would be considered black metal in the 80s, the genre even getting its namesake from Venom's second album, Black Metal. The influence Venom had on the genre would be considered one of the de facto building blocks, even being known as part of the first wave of black metal, one of the founders of the genre itself. Venom wouldn't come with music that was just offensive and disturbing in nature, but the presentation would follow suit. In many of their performances, they would also feature satanic imagery and take up stage names that would be considered blasphemous, as one member would pick up the name Jesus Christ or Christus within their involvement of Christian antithetical projects such as their first demo, Demon. From this point forward, black metal would have a very grim and convoluted history that to many is considered to be a genre with the wildest stories ever told, as the next waves of black metal bands would try to set themselves apart and exceed the simplicity of just shock value for the sake of disturbing the puritanical culture of the 1980s. And at the peak of what would further extensively develop the evolution of black metal, containing members and a track record that would set even more extreme standards within the scene and further define the genre, would be none other than the same band that is widely recognized as one of black metal history's defining entries, Mayhem.
When it's cold, and when it's dark, the moon can obsess you.
Mayhem is a black metal band that by many is considered to be one of the founding bands or pioneers of the genre as we know it. Mayhem hails from none other than the country that is widely recognized for the birth of the scene itself, Norway. The band formed in 1984 with original members Jorn Struberud, Kjetil Mannheim, and Øystein Erseth aka Euronymous. Euronymous being inspired by several bands at the time, such as Black Sabbath, Slayer, Motorhead, and even Venom, initially debuted his group as a cover band that at first would cover songs from the aforementioned bands and even name his own after one of Venom's very own songs, Mayhem with Mercy. Euronymous set out to start this band with a vision that they would evolve and push boundaries of what at the time was a new scene of music, one that would shake its cultural standards. Euronymous did not want the music and genre that he encapsulated to be easily accessible by those he deemed normal or frauds. He wanted his music to be something dark and evil, the essence of things that any normal individual would be afraid of. In the beginning, Mayhem as a band would struggle to find a sound that would really captivate the feel and atmosphere that it was attempting to execute. This would be partially because as Mayhem developed, the members were still learning how to use their instruments and sound. The other partial reason is mainly attributed to the fact that they could simply not maintain the vocals necessary to really execute what Euronymous wanted to accomplish. Mayhem went through a few vocalists, Messiah, Maniac, and even Euronymous himself, but Messiah and Maniac would not stay in the band for long as they either didn't show up to rehearsals or went on to pursue new goals as they both had different dreams and aspirations in terms of music and personal life matters. Maniac, however, remained in the band just long enough to record one EP in 1987, Death Crush, of which 1,000 copies were made and quickly sold out. An EP that was a glimpse into the sound that Mayhem was attempting to perfect. Not much longer as the year turned over, Mannheim and Maniac would depart Mayhem. It wouldn't take long before the vacant positions in Mayhem were filled, and thus we got the introduction of Pelle aka Dead, and Jan Axel Blomberg, aka Hellhammer. With the addition of these members, the band would go through a metamorphosis that changed and evolved not just Mayhem, but black metal history forever. Having heard of Mayhem's need for a new frontman, Pelle would not hesitate to reach out and set an example of what he was capable of, even going as far as to leave Morbid, a band he was a part of, as he had conflicts of how Morbid seemed to stagnate. In an effort to reach out, Pelle had done something peculiar, something more than in line with the type of character that he was. In Pelle's package to Mayhem, Jorn would be the recipient. What Jorn found inside the package was more than uncanny, the contents of the package being Pelle's contact information, the already decaying corpse of a rat which Pelle had crucified using sticks, and a demo from Morbid featuring his vocals. Not being able to bear the stench of the rotting rat, Jorn would dispose of everything but the demo, which he would listen to and come to the realization that Pelle was exactly what they needed. With the arrival of Pelle, it quickly became apparent that he would actually be nothing less than a perfect fit for Mayhem, and just as quickly, Pelle began to absolutely bond himself and the band's chemistry, providing the dark and warped vocals that would set the new definition of the band. Following Pelle's membership, the course of the band's direction improved dramatically. Not only did Pelle provide the perfect sound that Mayhem needed, but the character that was Pelle, which was not a character at all, but rather the true representation of himself as a person, would also set a precedence of what Mayhem as a band, and by extension black metal, would and should be, according to Euronymous' vision. Pelle was a very peculiar individual. At his core, he was considered to be deeply disturbed, something far more different and dark than the already hardcore nature of others in the black metal scene. As Pelle was growing up early into his childhood years, he was already struggling with many different problems, such as the divorce of his parents, and also developed sleep apnea while he was still young. By the time he was 10, Pelle would also receive a catastrophic spleen injury, which led to a rupture and internal bleeding. Pelle claimed at first that this was due to nothing more than just a skating accident, but upon a later interview in a Swedish book, Blood, Fire, Death, his brother would state that Pelle was the victim of frequent bullying and that the injury was a result of a severe beating. Regardless of the details, this injury resulted in Pelle needing extensive hospital care, an injury that would also lead to Pelle briefly entering a state where he was declared to be clinically dead. This event set out to define Pelle's existence for the rest of his life, or at least what he considered life. Due to the circumstances he endured and the brief time he was considered dead, Pelle developed a fascination with just that. Pelle genuinely believed he had already moved on from life. He believed he was nothing but dead. Pelle frequently had morbid visions and fantasies about his blood being absent from his body, his blood being frozen, himself being mortal but never human. In his mind, he belonged to the afterlife. He was already dead. The namesake for his stage name, Pelle, Dead Olin. For a long time, Pelle's disturbed nature has been a topic of debate. Fans and spectators alike believe that he possibly suffered from a condition known as Cotard syndrome, a mental affliction in where the person suffering from this disorder would believe that they were a corpse. People speculated that Pelle displayed many of Cotard's defining attributes, including self-starvation, something that even Euronymous himself said Pelle would do for the sake of developing starvation injuries. Pelle would take these beliefs and habits up several notches, which would only add to the overall defining themes of black metal. Due to his fascination and idealization of death, he would do things such as burying his clothes until they rotted, slitting his wrists with hunting knives during his performances, and even donning and pioneering the use of corpse paint, a term he coined himself, and solidify in black metal. You see, Pelle didn't just use the typical monochromatic colors of face paint for thematic purposes, he used it because he genuinely wanted to present himself as a corpse. It set itself apart from the typical use of face paint already present in black metal, as he wanted to symbolize death itself. This would popularize the use of corpse paint throughout black metal artists ever since, and Pelle would even be credited with the creation of corpse paint. Pelle's frequent display of morbid and genuinely dark behavior is something that would fascinate Euronymous. Euronymous believed that Pelle was everything black metal should be, something so opposite of what he considered normal, a truly dark and evil product of being part of death and black metal, genres he believed were only for people capable of killing, capable of death, capable of being beyond dark. It is said that Euronymous truly did admire Pelle, a fact that was so hard to believe considering the frequent contentions and altercations between the two of them. Euronymous and Pelle would frequently be at each other's necks, Euronymous apparently being a terrible housemate to Pelle, going out of his way to torment him, so much so that Pelle would act against him, hurling rocks and even stabbing Euronymous through a course of fights and arguments that drove one of their band members, Hellhammer, away from a cabin they were living in at the time. As a matter of fact, Euronymous' constant vitriol towards Pelle was something that was picked up on by everyone who knew them and would lead to them having disgust for Euronymous as time went on. It was no secret between any of them that Pelle was a deeply disturbed individual who was dealing with what they consider more and more extreme depression. They knew he fantasized about taking his own life. They knew Pelle truly wanted to be dead. Pelle's mental health had gotten so bad it had reached a point where he would even self-harm, not just in performances but also in front of his friends, an action that worried everyone around him. It got so out of control that they would also force Pelle to stop and tend to his cuts. Euronymous knew all of this too. It was even a topic that was brought up in regards to obstacles in production, in regards to how Pelle would cut himself too much during gigs and lead to delays. Euronymous, however, thought that this was perfect for the theme and dark nature of Mayhem and continued to further encourage Pelle's fantasies about passing on and would go on to push Pelle over the edge. This did actually come to pass, as on April 8th, 1991, Pelle would go on to take his own life. Euronymous had left Pelle alone unattended in the cabin they were living in, which Euronymous would receive criticism for, as his friends and onlookers believe he did so intentionally so that Pelle could be left to his own devices and succumb to his mental turmoil. When Euronymous returned, he found Pelle's lifeless body, along with the suicide note he wrote just moments before following through with the actions he had written. Excuse all the blood, but I have slit my wrists and neck. It was the intention that I would die in the woods so that it would take a few days before I was possibly found. I belong in the woods and have always done so. No one will understand the reason for this anyway. To give some semblance of an explanation, I'm not a human. This is just a dream, and soon I will awake. It was too cold and the blood was coagulating all the time. Plus my new knife is too dull. If I don't succeed dying to the knife, I will blow all the shit out of my skull, yet I do not know. I left all my lyrics by Let the Good Times Roll, plus the rest of my money. Whoever finds it gets the fucking thing. As a last solution, may I present Life Eternal. Do whatever you want with the fucking thing. Pelle. I didn't come up with this now, but 17 years ago. Pelle did take his life with a shotgun placed near his forehead, Euronymous being the first one to discover the body. Before calling authorities or any form of law enforcement to report Pelle's passing, he drove out to purchase a Polaroid camera and upon his return, decorate the already gruesome scene into something more to his liking. He then proceeded to take several photographs of such a scene. This led to Mayhem's band members forming disgust and a disdain of sorts towards Euronymous. Nobody but Euronymous could respect his actions. Euronymous bragged about possessing these photographs and even urged one of his band members, Hellhammer, to help with their development. He also gloated to Necrobutcher, who was fond of Pelle, about Pelle's suicide and the photographs he had taken. This infuriated Necrobutcher, who was one of the founding members of the band, to the point that he threatened to kill Euronymous over something so appalling. Euronymous found great satisfaction in being able to have possession of these images. Once questioned about it in an interview, he exclaimed that it was not just every day you come across a real corpse, so it was only necessary to take photographs of something he considered to be amazing. It was Euronymous' intent to distribute these images with the band members, including Necrobutcher, and even planned to use it as one of their album covers for a future release. Not long after, Necrobutcher, being conflicted with Euronymous' psychotic behavior, decided to part ways with the band. Euronymous' behavior got exceedingly more toxic following Pelle's death and lashed out at anyone and everyone, even going so far as to threatening people he disagreed with or considered to be posers in the overall scene of hardcore metal. He would continue to make enemies and even face jail time at some point for the assault and laceration of someone he had attacked with a glass bottle. When questioned about his thoughts on Pelle's suicide, Euronymous claimed that Pelle had killed himself because he was tired of living in a world where he was creating music for people who would only listen to them because it was trendy. He wanted to create evil music for evil people and no longer wanted to be a part of a world filled with normal people. Although, again, it is speculated that this was Euronymous' own beliefs being superimposed onto the persona of someone that was no longer there to speak for himself. Whether Euronymous' behavior at the time was his way of coping with Pelle's death or him staring deeper into the abyss of black metal is still up to speculation. It was at this point that everyone who was a part of the band, either in the past or current, would start to take problems with Euronymous' behavior as well. But regardless of this, the show had to go on. The death of Pelle had shocked the black metal scene and had only made Mayhem more notorious. Not just because Pelle had gruesomely taken his own life, but because word that Euronymous had documented the event would bring Mayhem morbid curiosity and attention from all corners of the scene. And not long after, to make the band whole once again following Necrobutcher's departure, came Varg Vikernes, the Count, Grishnach, to be the replacement bass guitarist. While Euronymous was mostly talk and would speak bigger than what he himself was capable of, Varg was a man filled with contempt and darkness in his own right, in a way that would spell the end for Euronymous. Before Varg joined Mayhem, Varg formed a one-man band named Burzum, which was also a staple of black metal as the culture knew it. It was during the time that Varg was producing music under Burzum that Euronymous took him under his wing and became his mentor of sorts, which spelt the beginning of the end. While at first Varg looked up to Euronymous as the de facto cool guy in black metal, the way he thought of Euronymous changed. As Varg got to know Euronymous more, it would become apparent to him that Euronymous would punch up more than he could handle, due to what he suspected to be envy. Varg thought that Euronymous kept the doors to black metal under lock and key, not just because Euronymous was elitist about their craft, but because he didn't want competition. During the time Varg was producing music under Euronymous, they both had ideations of what truly made black metal. They both knew that they had to reject normalcy. They had to make black metal stand for something more and more extreme as the scene continued to grow, to deter any would-be poser. Varg thought the best way to go about this was to become an enemy of normalcy, to reject Christianity and its desecration of his Viking culture and ancestry, thus he would be culprit of many arsons in Norway throughout the 90s. One infamous burning being the 1992 raise of the Fan Church, an arson that Varg would not only be responsible for, but photographed as well and later used as the cover for one of his Burzum albums. Euronymous was not absent from these arsons, as in another notable case, the burning of the Holmenkollen Chapel, Varg and Euronymous attempted to bomb the chapel. The improvised explosive failed to detonate, so they resorted to burning the church down via soaking Bibles and hymnals on the altar. These were just a couple of notable cases that only further became a part of black metal history and are largely notable for perpetuating the trend of religious arson and its ties to the black metal scene of the 90s. Somewhere along the line, Varg began to lose respect for Euronymous, as the attention he gained for the death of Pelle and the church arsons of the 90s led to Euronymous shutting down Helvete, a record shop that he owned and sold records out of. Among the records Euronymous sold were not just Mayhem's very own, but also those of other bands he supported and signed, and none other than Varg's very own, Burzum. At the time, it was claimed by Varg that Euronymous had sold all of Burzum's records and still owed revenue and royalties to Varg. Varg wanted Euronymous to have success in Helvete, even participating in an interview where he had claimed he'd done all manners of heinous things in an attempt to bring more attention to the record shop. Ultimately, Helvete did gain more attention because of this, but it attracted the very things Euronymous wanted nothing to do with, the media and law enforcement. Thus, Euronymous felt it more secure to shut down his record shop and seclude himself away from the public. Euronymous' actions and behavior angered Varg, because to him, this was extremely unlike Euronymous. Varg considered him to have become the opposite of what the black metal scene was built for. In Varg's eyes, Euronymous had become a wimp who still owed him money for his contributions. And this is something that among many fans and participants of the scene is debated to be the motivation behind Varg's murder of Euronymous, as on August 10, 1993, Varg would confront and murder Oystein Euronymous Arseth. However, Varg told his own story, which is also widely debated and speculated to be true or not. Varg claimed that his actions were entirely in self-defense over a misunderstanding, but beyond that, rumors he had heard from a friend of both himself and Euronymous. As he tells it, the amount Euronymous owed was nothing but a petty average month's salary at the time, and would not be a reasonable incentive for what he did. After all, it was in his best interest that Euronymous stay alive to pay what he owed him, or so he claimed. Varg further claimed that he heard a rumor from a friend that Euronymous was planning to incapacitate Varg by making him immobile with an electric weapon. Once Varg was incapacitated, it was Euronymous' intention to drag him out to the woods, torture him, and kill him, all while filming the act. Having heard this, Varg wanted to conclude his business with Euronymous once and for all. He set out to meet Euronymous in the middle of the night with a contract that would conclude their business relationship and entitle Varg to everything Euronymous owed him. Once Varg arrived to Euronymous' apartment and was buzzed in, they came face to face. Varg reached out to hand him the contract, get his signature, and be done with the situation. Once Varg raised his hand, Euronymous panicked, kicked Varg in the chest, and scrambled to attain a nearby knife in his kitchen. Varg followed after him, pulling a pocket knife of his own, and began to counter Euronymous. From this point forward, Euronymous lost his edge and ran out of the apartment. Varg chased him down to a stairway, stabbing him multiple times, and killing him. An act of self-defense from Euronymous' initial attack and attempt at his life, or at least this is the story Varg claimed happened. Euronymous succumbed to his injuries, a total of 23 stab wounds. Upon his body's discovery, Varg was arrested for his murder just 5 days later, and the following year after the conclusion of his trial, he was sentenced to 21 years in prison for the murder of Euronymous, 3 church arsons, an attempt on a 4th church, and the attempted theft of 150 kilograms of explosives. Mayhem disbanded for a brief period after this tragic event, and the story of Euronymous' murder was one that took the world by storm. Everyone would go on to hear about Varg's brutal murder of Euronymous, and consider the tragic incident to be a very dark mark on the black metal scene. However, this did not stop members of the scene from backing down or tame their dark nature. If anything, the death of Euronymous also marked a turning point of the black metal scene, and influenced how black metal developed. From this point forward, black metal increased its embrace of Satanism and everything dark and evil. Mayhem was truly one of, if not the most influential bands in the scene. Despite the deaths of Pelle aka Dead, Oystein aka Euronymous, and the otherwise psychotic actions of Varg Vikernes, it did not stop Mayhem from releasing an album that featured both Varg, the murderer, and Euronymous, the victim. The album, titled De Mysteris Dom Satanas, would end up to be received by fans and critics as one of the best metal albums of all time, consistently ranking highly in many critics' lists. It went on to be widely respected by other bands, its songs having been covered extensively, and also inspired bands whose members had yet to ever been present in the scene, overall being instrumental in the third wave of black metal. From Pelle's signature corpse paint to Euronymous' evil, dark, morbid, and satanic beliefs within the inner ring of black metal, to even Varg Vikernes' infamous arsons of Christian churches, Mayhem would not just have an insane story to tell, but definitively define the genre that is known as black metal.